Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us today. First of all, let's start with the U.S. Sanctions announced against Russia. Is it something that the Ukrainian government asked for?
Well, it's certainly supportive of the Ukrainian government's policy, which is the peace plan that President Poroshenko has enunciated. President Poroshenko, this government, as far as we're concerned, is trying as hard as it possibly can to find a political solution to this crisis. And the administration has made clear that to the extent Russia is not prepared to begin working with the Ukrainian government, continues in its policies of destabilization, there will be a political and economic cost. And the sanctions announced yesterday are that cost.
So we saw from Russia recently kind of mixed messages. On the one hand, sort of readiness to go for the diplomatic solution. On the other hand, still continuing movement of personnel, of armor through the border. So how did the U.S. come to the conclusion that Russia is not playing the constructive role?
Well, we've been concentrated on actions, not words. And while there have been some positive words out of Moscow, the actions have been to the contrary. We've seen a continued flow of military equipment, heavy arms across the Ukrainian border coming from Russia. We've seen continued support to military separatist groups, the operation of a recruiting office in Moscow. All of this is of concern. Excuse me. We hope very much that the Russian government will use the considerable influence that it has over these groups to begin supporting the peace process, supporting the process of de-escalation. The goal here is not sanctions for their own sake. The goal here is a diplomatic solution, a diplomatic offer.
I understand that in the recent few weeks there was actually an escalation in separatists' action, and even their weapons are becoming more sophisticated. Is it so?
Absolutely. We have seen a significant escalation even over the past week in terms of the volume of tanks, heavy artillery coming across the border. Several aircraft shot down. The Ukrainian government believes that the AN-26 unarmed cargo plane that was shot down at the beginning of this week was brought down by a surface-to-air missile from Russia. There have been extensive use of these manpads. All of this is part of a pattern of military escalation that does not contribute to the peace process that President Poroshenko has laid out and his desire to reach out to the people of Donbass and to find a political solution that comes within the framework of Ukrainian democracy and the Ukrainian constitution.
So how satisfied you were with the news coming from Wednesday night's Brussels meeting of European leaders, because basically they didn't opt for sectoral sanctions as the US did. So are allies here truly in lockstep trying to deal with Russia?
We have a very close partnership with our European allies. We've consulted extensively, of course, in Brussels and in capitals, but also here in Kyiv, where I work very closely with my EU counterpart, Ambassador Tominsky, and all of the EU ambassadors. We see exactly eye to eye in terms of the situation here, in terms of the challenges going forward, and in terms of the importance of exacting a unified, internationally coordinated cost on Russia's refusal to support this peace process. Our systems are different. There are areas where Europe has moved faster than the United States. We've now moved ahead on some of these sanctions against Russian commercial and financial entities. But we will continue to move together in the same direction.
What do you think about the possibility of a Russian response to these sanctions? Can Russia actually punish Ukraine more for this US and Europe step?
I certainly hope not. It's in Russia's interest to have a stable, healthy relationship with Ukraine, with the people of Ukraine. This is not an anti-Russian country. You could see that earlier this week in the flowers and candles that were placed in front of the Russian embassy as a memorial to the victims of the terrible subway crash in Moscow. This government, I know from having spoken to President Poroshenko, Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, Foreign Minister Klimkin, This government wants a constructive relationship with Moscow, but it must be a relationship on the basis of sovereignty, respect for Ukraine's sovereign choice, including the sovereign choice of the Ukrainian people to move towards a closer institutional relationship with Europe.
So what can you tell you about what is going on now on the Ukrainian-Russian border? Because Russia is accusing Ukraine of shooting across the border. Then Ukrainian forces say they're shot at with Grad rockets. Not so clear if it's from Ukraine or Russia. What's going on there?
Well, it's a long way away. We rely to a significant degree on the reports of groups like the OSCE, the Special Monitoring Mission, the journalists who are present on the ground to understand what's happening in terms of military developments day to day. Obviously, we are interested in seeing the violence end as quickly as possible, but we also respect the requirement, the desire of the Ukrainian government to protect its own sovereign territory against a violent attack that is supported by groups coming across the border from Russia. We are concerned about any innocent victims who are caught in the crossfire. We welcome the progress that the Ukrainian government has made in its military campaign. Large swaths of territory have been brought out of the conflict area through Ukraine's military progress. Most importantly, the oblast center of Slavyansk, and I think we all are now interested in supporting the Ukrainian government and the efforts that the Ukrainian government is taking to restore services, to help give people a sense that they are getting control of their lives once again, and frankly, to undo the reign of terror that some of these separatist groups maintained when they were controlling these cities.
You've mentioned innocent victims. We had also mixed reports about refugees crossing, the Ukrainian refugees crossing the border into Russia, because there was a big difference in numbers between the U.S. estimates and the numbers that Russia publicized. So what's the source of the difference? What do you think is the real number?
They're displaced people who are moving in all directions out of the conflict area. Some of those displaced people are here in Kyiv now. There are residents from Slavyansk, from Donetsk, from Luhansk, who have moved to Dnipropetrovsk. Ukrainians have opened their arms and opened their homes to welcome these people. Some have also chosen to flee across the border into Russia. So our interest is seeing the situation stabilize as quickly as possible, seeing that people are able to return to their homes. I'm encouraged by news that that's already begun to occur in Slavyansk and some of the other cities that have been released from these separatist groups. And I hope very much that this process will continue as quickly as possible.
We saw also General Philip Breedlove, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Europe and U.S. European Command. He basically wrote that Russia is using sophisticated 21st century warfare in Ukraine. So was the West really surprised by these tactics?
I thought General Breedlove's analysis was spot on, and it captured the most insidious aspect of this Russian campaign, which has been the use of misdirection and confusion. The little green men in uniforms without badges that we first saw in Crimea, the tanks rolling across the border from Russia. These, by the way, are a category of tank which is no longer in the Russian military inventory. They were old, retired tanks in the Russian military inventory, which they bring into Ukraine precisely because they're still part of the Ukrainian inventory, trying to create the false impression that this is Ukrainian government military equipment. So I think General Breedlove is spot on in his assessment that this represents a new strategy, which presents a challenge to the international community. Much of Russia's actions since the end of February, when they began the invasion and annexation of Crimea, have represented a direct challenge to the European security order that all of us are invested in and all of us have a stake in upholding.
So what is your estimate right now? How much control does the Ukrainian government have over the situation? And by the way, what happens if the separatists lose in terms of, again, possible Russian response?
Well, let me say three things. First of all, the question of control. What's most important is that Russia has complete control over these separatist groups. All of the leaders of the separatist government in Donetsk are Russian citizens. These are Russian passport holders. These are not Ukrainian people. The deputy prime minister recently named in Donetsk is a Russian intelligence officer who was earlier part of the administration in Transnistria. So we should have no illusions about who controls the situation in the Donetsk People's Republic, the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. On the question of the Ukrainian government, first of all, life in the vast majority of Ukraine is completely normal. Here in Kyiv, you would never know that people are fighting and dying in the east of the country. Today is a beautiful summer day in Kyiv. Life goes on. The economy is humming along. This is a relatively isolated phenomenon of violence in a small corner of the country, but it needs to be brought to an end. On your question of what happens to the separatists, I come back to the very important peace process that President Poroshenko has put on the table. President Poroshenko's peace package includes an absolute offer of amnesty for all who put down their weapons, who have not been involved in grievous crimes, grievous violent crimes. So the question, first of all, the question of what happens to these individuals is for the Ukrainian legal system to work out. We hope, I would certainly hope, that the fighters who have come from Russia should go home to Russia and do whatever they were doing before they picked up their weapons and came here to Ukraine and began causing chaos. And for those who are Ukrainian citizens, there is an offer of amnesty which President Poroshenko and his government have put on the table.
That's the positive scenario. If we're sticking right now to the negative scenario, recently the Ukrainian forces received some of the U.S. aid, bulletproof vests, etc., and their officials basically said, we thank the U.S., but we also need communications equipment and we also need precision weapons. So the Ukrainian plane was shot now probably with some sort of sophisticated weapon. So precision weapons, is it on the table now?
At this point, our focus is non-lethal assistance. We have massively increased that non-lethal assistance to $23 million this year. It includes the body armor that you referred to, also night vision devices, robots to deal with munitions and defusing of bombs, medical equipment, communications equipment. All of this is part of the effort to raise the operational capability of the Ukrainian military to defend Ukrainian territory. We also continue to work very closely, as we have for many years, with the State Border Guard, helping the State Border Guard, along with our European partners, I should add, to police and control the frontier with Russia. We have a long-standing program which goes back for decades to help develop through training and exercises, the operational capabilities and interoperability of the Ukrainian military. President Poroshenko is very clear. He says he wants to develop a NATO standard military, a military that meets NATO and Western standards of professionalism and of capability. And I'm confident that we're going to continue to help him to achieve that goal.
Just the last question. The U.S. administration now has numerous crises on its plate. Things are getting bad in Iraq. It's not really clear what's going on with Afghanistan. There is a crisis in Gaza. So for how long do you think the U.S. is committed to assist Ukraine? How long is this attention span now of the administration?
We have a 23-year partnership with Ukraine. We have a strategic partnership with this government. President Poroshenko, Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, this all have excellent relations with their U.S. government counterparts and interlocutors. I am confident that we are going to continue to build and strengthen this partnership. We also benefit from the very strong congressional interest in what's unfolding here. And I should add the strong interest of the Ukrainian American community, which is a fantastic multiplier in helping Americans to understand what's unfolding here and helping Ukrainians to understand the goals of the United States, which at the end of the day come down to the principle that President Obama has enunciated. The Ukrainian people should have the right to choose what their future is going to be.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.